Hello again. In the last video, we saw how the interaction between Psalms 83 and Obadiah 1 happens because Asaph in Psalm 83 is praying for the deliverance of Israel, and he's also praying that the enemies of Israel will be defeated, and as a result, will look to God and repent and be saved. In Obadiah, we see the prophecy, which is the answer of that prayer, and the neighbors of Israel are defeated, and then saviors come that will judge the Mount of Esau. And in this fourth video, I'm going to further elaborate on this theme by discussing the harmony of those two passages, Psalm 83 and Obadiah, with the book of Revelation, because as we're going to see, when Jesus is writing to the seven churches, this whole arrangement, this whole process that is actually taken and put together into a final form. I wish I could give this to you in 2 minutes and be done with it, but the truth of the matter is that if I did that, maybe 1% of you would understand what I'm talking about. So what we're going to have to do is go through the seven churches and build up to the point where we can understand how the letters to the seven churches relate to the issue we're talking about. At this point, in order to keep this video from becoming too long, I would like for you to hit the pause button and go and read the second and the third chapter of the book of Revelation. Then I will come back with the assumption that you have already read that, and I will be referring to the specific points that we need to make about each one of the churches. So assuming that you've read about the churches of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, we now need to make the point that while these are the real churches that at the time of John Jesus is addressing these letters to, these are also historical periods that represent the different stages that the church has gone through. This is a very commonly accepted concept in prophetic circles, and we need to be careful how to define this concept because the fact of the matter is that every type of church is always been present in the world at any specific time. However, it is also true, and we're going to make the point in a little bit, that each one of these churches is representative of the spirit of the church that is most predominant at each specific time of the history of the church. So let's look at how these periods of time are broken down according to each specific one of the churches. The first church, the church of Ephesus, starts at the day of Pentecost and goes until 100 AD, and this is the Apostolic Church. In 100 AD to 313 is the church that is the suffering church. This is the time that the Roman Empire persecutes severely Christianity. Then the Church of Pergamum in 313, that is the end of persecutions with the Edict of Mediolan, and it goes until 600 AD. And this is the time that the Byzantine Empire is the torchbearer of the spirit of the church of that age. Then starting with 600 AD and with Pope Gregory, who is instrumental in shifting the power and the emphasis from the Byzantine Empire to the Western Roman part of the church, and that goes from 600 AD to 1517 AD, and this is the Roman Catholic time period. Then in 1517, with Reformation starting and going to 1648, this is the period of Sardis. This is the dead church. This is the church of the Reformation. And with Philadelphia, 1648 to 1900, this is the evangelistic church. This is the church that the emphasis is on evangelism. And then from 1900 to the present is the Church of Laodicea, which is the lukewarm church. Now, this is a very simplistic and very superficial kind of description, because as we're going to see, there is more to it in this historical kind of interpretation. Going back now to the church of Ephesus, I would like to point out that to this church Jesus gives a lot of commendations, and he has one thing against it, that they left their first love. This is the apostolic church, and I would like to bring your attention to the 6th verse, because it says here, "But this you have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." The Nicolaitans is a feature of the church of Pergamos. So, at this early stage, we can see that Pergamos exists within the church. This is just to reinforce the idea that every type of church has always been present at any period of time. Next is the church of Smyrna. The 2 points that I would like for you to remember from this church is that this is the first church with nothing negative on its record. Jesus gives them a lot of commendations. He has nothing negative to say about them. And the second point, which is very important to remember, is that this is the first church that we see something about these Jews who say that they're Jews but they're not, and instead they're the synagogue of Satan. This is going to become very important in our subsequent discussion, so I need you to remember this one point. Next we come to Pergamum. Pergamum represents the period from 313 to 600 AD, and this is the Byzantine period. One point we need to remember is that nothing is mentioned about anybody claiming to be a Jew with this church. The second point to look at is the doctrine of Balaam. This doctrine is the mixing of political power, wealth, social acceptance with religion. Anybody that has studied the period of the Byzantine Empire will realize that this is so characteristic of the church of that period. In 313, with the Edict of Mediolan, the Roman Empire stopped persecuting the Christians, and because Constantine the Great himself became a Christian, it became politically correct to accept Christianity, even though somebody may not be sincere about it. It was the thing to do. It was politically correct. It was socially accepted to become a Christian. Later on, with Emperor Justinian, things got even more advanced in that Justinian declared Christianity to be the only accepted official religion of the empire, and any other religion was persecuted. Then you also have the doctrine of the Nicolaitans in this church, and again, from history, you can see that this matches perfectly with what was going on in the church. The word Nicolaitans comes from two Greek words. The one is Nikol, which is to have victory over, and laity, we know laity, it is the crowd, it is the people. So it is having victory over the people. What this doctrine is all about is the teachings that Jesus himself is not the giver of grace, but the priest is. The priest is the representative of Jesus, so he takes grace from Jesus and he gives it to the people. In that way, the priesthood is elevated over the laity to a status that gives it more power than it should have, and it allows for the abuse of the flock. As you see the development of these doctrines and how they represent the church, you will see that this theory of the different churches representing different time periods becomes credible, and it really fits in the whole scheme of things. Both of these doctrines, the doctrine of Balaam and the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, work together to make the priests so politically powerful that for an emperor in the Byzantine Empire to become an emperor, he had to be approved by the church, he had to be coronated by the patriarch, and it had to be done in the church. Within the church, the priest became more important than Jesus himself, because the church taught that God's grace had to be dispensed by the priest as he performed the 10 mysteries that are included in their catechism. The church and the monastery became a feudal center that owned vast amounts of land, and personal property was so diminished that it stripped the Byzantine Empire of all sources of taxation. It weakened the empire, and eventually it became easy spoil for the Muslims that attacked them. Next, the Church of Thyatira. This is the Roman Catholic Church. Again, nothing is said about Jews. In verse 20, we read, "Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols." Again, there is a perfect historical fit, because the spirit of Nicolaitans fused with the spirit of Balaam in the Church of Pergamum, which is the Greek Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire, comes to full fruition and to full maturity as the order of the priesthood gets a hold of the Roman Catholic Church. Now the priests become political magnates. I want to emphasize what we have here in Thyatira is the result of the fusion and the maturation of the spirit of Balaam with the spirit of Nicolaitans. Jezebel was a queen in Israel. She came to have control of the whole nation, but she got there by infiltrating the palace. She was a Zidonian. She had no business being in control of Israel. She got to that position by taking advantage of weak-minded Ahab. The spirit of Jezebel represents the spirit of rebellion in high places. Both the spirit of Balaam and the spirit of the Nicolaitans, as we have discussed, is aimed at taking control of the leadership of the church, and it did so in the Byzantine Empire at the Pergamum stage of church history. As that rebellion in the church matured, it took its full expression in the spirit of Jezebel in the papal church. We know from history that the popes of the period dropped all pretenses of spirituality. They anointed themselves heads of state. They fought wars. They launched the Crusades. They shamelessly exploited the flock that they were supposed to be shepherding. And yet, it is interesting to note that Jesus gives many commendations to this church. I see this as evidence that the common people within the church were pure in their desire to please God, and that the Lord overlooks the outward expressions of religion, and He looks in the heart. As long as people seek to please Him, they do not have to have every T crossed and every I dotted when it comes to doctrinal theories and interpretations. Next one on the list is the Church of Sardis. This is the dead church. It starts at 1517 and it ends with 1648. Now, what's the significance of these dates? 1517 is the year when Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses at the Church of Wittenberg, and therefore starts the Reformation. Many would be surprised to hear that the Reformation Church is considered to be a dead church. And yet, when Jesus says, strengthen the things that remain, what he really means is the only thing that remains is them is correct doctrine. Martin Luther saw the error of the papal ways by studying the Bible for himself, and he went against the Catholic Church for their false teaching. However, what happened was not any kind of an attempt to convert people to the right ways of being a Christian in peaceful and Christ-like ways. What we have at that period of history is monarchs in Europe that do not want to be subjects to the power of the Vatican, taking up the banner of the Protestant Reformation and going to war under the pretension of religious purity against the Pope. This is a spectacle that is unacceptable, having Protestants fighting Catholics in real wars over religious doctrine. At least that was the pretense. This is not how you preach the gospel. That is the way of Islam. That is not the way of Christianity. Now, the significance of 1648, I don't know if I agree with that demarcation, but in 1648 is when the Treaty of Westphalia was signed, and thus ended the 30-year war. And the basic provision that makes this significant in this context is that people in Europe were granted the right to practice a religion other than the official religion of their state. Up until then, If you lived in Spain, you had to be a Catholic, otherwise you'd be persecuted. If you lived in England, you had to be an Anglican, otherwise you'd be persecuted. If you lived in Netherlands, you had to be a Protestant, otherwise you would be persecuted. In 1648, this changes, and freedom of religion begins to take hold, and of course it reaches its full expression in the New World in America. Now again, a very important thing to remember is that the Church of Sardis also has no mentioning of any Jews like the church in Smyrna. What I want to do next is lay out some more groundwork and some more statistics in order to prepare us to see how the book of Revelation harmonizes with Psalm 83 and the book of Obadiah. To begin this part of the discussion, I would like to draw your attention to the map of the seven churches. You can see that Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum, these are the first three churches. These are the oldest churches. They're all on the west. Thyatira and Sardis, the fourth and the fifth church, are on the east. Then further east comes Philadelphia and Laodicea. I don't know if it is worth bringing it to your attention, but it really struck my fancy, because this layout, which is only geographic layout, fits perfectly with what I wanted to talk about, and I just saw it as I was preparing for this taping. What is on the west speaks of what is going by. What is on the east speaks of what is coming, what is new. The sun is rising on the east, it sets on the west. These three churches are the old time kind of churches. These four churches are new, and it is an interesting detail that I want you to keep in mind as I go on with this discussion. Now let's take a look and see how this old versus new church works out in the letters as they're written by the Lord to the churches. The church of Thyatira, we see the reference in verse 22, "Behold, I will cast her into a bed, and them that commit adultery with her into great tribulation, except they repent of their deeds." Now, this is not a very veiled threat, because it's speaking about the Great Tribulation. What Jesus is saying here is that unless they repent, these people that hold the Jezebel spirit are going to be cast into the Great Tribulation. Next, let's look at Sardis. Revelation 3:3, "If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour will come upon thee." This is a clear reference to the time that Jesus comes to rapture the church. He's warning them to be ready. So then these two churches, the church of Thyatira and the church of Sardis, even though they're not going to be the representative church of the end of the age, nevertheless they're prominent enough that they're going to be represented very significantly, and they're going to experience the last days. They're going to experience the rapture of the church, and in the case of Thyatira, it's going to experience the Great Tribulation. So if that is true, then we must naturally expect that the last two churches, Philadelphia and Laodicea, will also have the same kind of reference that is describing the time of the end. So looking at Philadelphia, in 3:10 we read, "Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I will also keep you from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth." Now this is the hour of temptation that is speaking about the Great Tribulation. So there you have it, a very clear reference to the last day in the case of Philadelphia. Things are not quite as crisp and clear in the case of Laodicea, but if you think about it, this also is a reference to the Great Tribulation. "So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth." This is the curious reference, a curious warning, because all we have seen Jesus ever warn people is being cast to the outer darkness, being cast to the lake of fire, being guilty of the Gehenna, things like that. And this speaks of final judgment. Here, spewing you out of his mouth does not necessarily mean eternal damnation, it is sort of a veiled reference, but it still speaks to the fact that when Jesus comes to receive his church, he's going to leave them behind. They are not eternally condemned. They will have another chance to be saved, but at the point of the rapture, they are being rejected. So then, all four of these last churches that are lined up on the east side, as we saw in the picture, are churches that are prominent enough to be represented in the time of the rapture of the church, and some of them into the Great Tribulation. If you think back at the material that I have already presented, you will realize that some of the churches have been associated with a specific nation. For instance, the church of Ephesus, the first church, the Apostolic Church, is mainly represented by the Jewish apostles, and even though they are apostates according to the Jews of the time, the main consistency of the first church is Jewish. Then when you come to Pergamum, it is the nation of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, the Greek section, that is the main torchbearer of the spirit of the church, which is the church of Pergamum. Then you move to the church of Thyatira, and there it is the western part of the Roman Empire, and it centers into the Vatican, and that is the nation that is the torchbearer of the spirit of the Church of Thyatira. Then there is not a specific nation representing Sardis, but when you come to Philadelphia and to Laodicea, there is one country that is going to represent and be the torchbearer of both the spirits of these churches, and in a unique way, both Philadelphia and Laodicea are going to be represented by the nation of America. If you have studied this subject before, then you know that there has not been very much clear teaching. You have read that 1648 to 1900 is the Church of Philadelphia, but how does this period of church differ from 1900 to the present? What is it that defines the Church of Philadelphia, and how does it differ from the later period? So let's go back to these dates that we've seen before. The Church of Philadelphia is said to have started in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, which established that the Europeans were free to practice any religion they wanted. However, I said that I don't really agree with that date. I would pick 1620 because that is the year that the Mayflower Compact is signed, and the Pilgrims have declared in it that they found this colony in America with the express purpose of advancing the kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. Then the Church of Philadelphia closes in 1900, and I don't know why they picked this date. Maybe it's because it's the turn of the century, but I would pick 1892 because this is the year that Ellis Island opened and began operating. Now I realize that you may have been a little confused by my interpretation of these facts. However, you must think of how did the gospel go forth between 1620 until the time of the Ellis Island. Today, when we talk about missions, we think of sending a missionary off to China or to India and giving them money and supporting them so they can preach the gospel and convert the Chinese where they're at. However, this is not the most effective way of doing things. The best way to give the gospel to somebody is to let them come in to your country, and there they are the guests. There, they have to look to you in order to get their cues of how to conduct themselves. It is a lot easier for an African or a Chinese or an Indian to come to America and accept the gospel because this is the way of life where he came to, than for a missionary to go there and tell them that they're all wrong and what they're doing is nonsense and this is the way to go, here, have the gospel. The most effective way is to let people come in, and evangelism has to go forth both ways. You have to welcome the stranger, and you have to go to the stranger. And the early Americans understood that, and they welcomed everybody, whether you were sick or destitute. The focus was not on what these guys are going to do to us, but the focus was how are we going to help these guys be saved. And this was a real meaningful practice of that compact that said that our purpose for being here to advance the kingdom of Jesus Christ. This is top priority. This is an outward looking, this is a selfless approach, this is an other-centered kind of Christianity. And this was the practice during this period between 1620 to 1892, and this is what made the Church of Philadelphia, the evangelistic church, the church from which the gospel went into the world. When Ellis Island begins to operate, it marks the beginning of a change in attitude. The focus is no longer propagating the gospel in any way possible. The focus now becomes how are we going to keep what we got? How are we going to keep the undesirables out? How are we going to enrich our land? And that is what marks the attitude of the Church of Laodicea. Of course, the issue of immigration is a very thorny issue, and I would like to add my comments on what's going on today. The picture we have is a real work of the devil. The people of God gave up on welcoming strangers and focusing on saving strangers. So the devil moves in and takes over every piece of ground that the people of God abandoned. And what is going on with immigration today is a real work of the devil, and it is meant to destroy, and it is meant to wreak havoc. So please do not take my interpretation of what happened back in Ellis Island with what is happening on today. I totally reject the idea of illegal immigration. I know that this is about the longest introduction into a subject that you have ever been through, but I believe it was necessary knowledge to have in order to go on and discuss the harmony that there is between Psalm 83, Obadiah, and what Jesus says to the churches. So let's look at the church of Smyrna. You remember this is the suffering church. For this church, Jesus has nothing negative to say. And another thing about this church, it mentions about these Jews that are not really Jews, but they're the synagogue of Satan. Now, who are these people? That should be fairly obvious. At the time of the first churches, Judaism was prominent. The Romans considered Christianity as a sect of Judaism, and while that was the case, the Christians were not that severely persecuted, or if they were persecuted as troublemakers. However, the Romans did not allow the creation of a new religion. They accepted all the religions that already existed, but any new religion was a breaking of the law of the Roman Empire. So when the Jews began to disown and publicly disavow their connection with Christianity, and the Romans became more and more aware of the fact that Christianity was not just a sect, but a totally new religion, that gave rise to more severe persecution for the Christians, and that started the period of the Church of Smyrna. And you see how it becomes relevant for Jesus to speak about the Jews who, even though they're claiming that they're the children of God, in reality they're breaking the law of God because they did not accept the Messiah he sent to them. And it is an obvious thing to see that Jesus would make this point to the Church of Smyrna to encourage them and to tell them that you are right and these Jews that reject you are wrong and they're just a synagogue of Satan. And the interesting thing that we need to remember is that after he says that they're the synagogue of Satan, he drops them, which means that these Jews are eternally condemned and they're lost. Now we come to Philadelphia. This is the evangelistic church. It is the church that predominated between 1620 and 1892. However, we remember that Philadelphia is also going to be prominent, even though it's not going to be the characteristic church, right up to the time of the end, because Jesus does promise them to keep them away from the temptation, which is the great tribulation that is coming to try the earth. So Philadelphia is alive and well in our time, but it is Laodicea that is the prominent church. So let's go back to this text here, and remember again, Philadelphia has nothing said against it, just like Smyrna did, and Philadelphia also has this thing about these Jews. But there are some very significant differences between the Jews that are mentioned in Smyrna and the Jews that are mentioned in Philadelphia. And let's look at these differences. I have set before you an open door, and no man can shut it, for you have a little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Now, the natural question for somebody that reads this letter up to this point is, what's the open door? And Jesus explains it immediately, and you can see that it is the explanation to that question, because it says, behold. This behold connects what is coming to what preceded it. What preceded it is the open door. Jesus is promising an open door. And now by saying, behold, he's getting ready to describe what the open door is. And here is the open door. I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, who say they're Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet. Now this is about as curious of a reference in these 7 letters as there is. Who are these Jews that are connected with Philadelphia? The Jewish people, the Israelites of our day, are irrelevant to the life of the church. What can it be that these are Jews, and not only they are Jews, but they are also connected to this open door that Jesus is promising to the Church of Philadelphia? Now you have to step back and think about what it is to be Jew. The real meaning of a Jew is to be a child of God. The only people of our day that can be said to be claiming to be the real children of God, rather than the Christians, who also claim to be the children of God, are the Muslims. The Muslims claim that God did not fulfill his promise to Abraham through Isaac. He fulfilled it through Ishmael. And Ishmael is the line through which real Jewishness can be claimed. So you see that the open door that Jesus is speaking about and promising to Philadelphia is today's descendants of Ishmael. It is Islam. Now, do you see how it all connects? In Psalm 83, Asaph is praying for the enemies of Israel, who are going to be the Islamists, neighbors of Israel in the future to come, and he's praying for them to be defeated and therefore to seek for his face and be saved. Then Obadiah prophesies this very war, and he prophesies that they will be defeated, and in connection to that there will be saviors that will come to judge the Mount of Isa. There will be saviors that will come to bring the gospel to the Islamic world that has been defeated at the hands of Israel. And here in Revelation, Jesus sets up the open door, which is exactly the same thing. Do you see how the breaking down of the Islamic curtain is the theme that's running through these 3 passages? Notice here the big difference between the Jews that are mentioned in Smyrna and the Jews that are mentioned in Philadelphia. In Smyrna, it said that they are the synagogue of Satan, and he drops them. These people are lost. Here, he says there is the synagogue of Satan, but he does not drop them. He says they will make them to come and worship at the feet of the Church of Philadelphia. To worship, I don't know how else to explain it, but to worship means to be saved so that you can worship. I do hope that you see the magnitude of this. I don't know how much more clear to make it, but if you go through these videos again and again, I hope that you will be able to see that what I was talking about in the fulfillment of Matthew 24, where Jesus says that the gospel of this kingdom will be preached in all the world, and then the end shall come. And you remember that I said that the Islamic curtain has to come down. And in working our way through Psalms 83 and Obadiah and now Revelation, we see that this thing is going to become real, and we're going to see it in our day. Unfortunately, there is going to be a lot of trouble before this thing happens. In the next video I'm going to make, I will try to tie this whole thing together and speak to how I see this whole thing developing, because I believe that before the end of next year, most of these events are going to have been completed.